The wedding dress hung in Margaret's room like a ghost of someone else's future. White silk and delicate lace, imported all the way from San Francisco at her father's insistence, it was everything a respectable banker's daughter should want for her special day. Tomorrow she would wear it to marry Thomas Whitmore, the sheriff's son, in front of the entire town of Cedar Ridge. Tomorrow she would become the perfect wife everyone expected her to be. But tonight, as she stared at that pristine dress in the lamplight, all Margaret could think about was a boy with dirt under his fingernails and a crooked smile who used to meet her behind the schoolhouse when they were 16. Daniel Mackenzie, the ranch hand's son who'd promised to marry her someday, back when promises meant everything and forever felt possible. That was 15 years ago, before the drought killed his family's cattle, before his father lost the ranch to the bank, before Daniel disappeared one morning without even saying goodbye. Margaret had waited for a letter, a word, anything to explain why the boy who'd carved their initials into the old oak tree had vanished like smoke in the wind. She'd waited until waiting became a habit, then a heartache, then finally a memory she'd learned to keep locked away. But what Margaret didn't know was that Daniel Mackenzie had spent every one of those 15 years building something worthy of the girl he'd left behind. He'd worked cattle drives through Texas, saved every penny, learned to read and write properly, and finally bought his own spread in Montana. He'd become the man he'd always promised he would be: successful, respectable, worthy of a banker's daughter's hand. And now he was riding back to Cedar Ridge with a ring in his pocket and 15 years of love burning in his chest, unaware that the woman he'd never stopped thinking about was 24 hours away from marrying another man. The sound of hoofbeats on the dusty main street made Margaret's heart skip, though she couldn't say why. Travelers came through Cedar Ridge all the time, cowboys and merchants and drifters heading west to chase their fortunes. But something about these particular hoofbeats, steady, purposeful, unhurried, made her move to the window and peer through the lace curtains. The man riding into town sat his horse like he owned the world, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. Even in the fading light, even after 15 years of changes that should have made him unrecognizable, Margaret knew that profile as well as she knew her own reflection. The strong jaw, the confident way he held his head, the gentle hands that had once braided wildflowers into her hair. Daniel Mackenzie had come home, but as their eyes met across the dusty street, his shocked recognition mirroring her own breathless disbelief, Margaret realized that some homecomings don't heal old wounds. Sometimes they tear them wide open again, forcing you to choose between the life you built and the love you never forgot. Tomorrow she would marry Thomas Whitmore. Tonight she had to decide if she had the courage to break her own heart all over again. Margaret's hands trembled as she stepped away from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Daniel Mackenzie, here, in Cedar Ridge, the night before her wedding to another man. She pressed her back against the wall, trying to steady her breathing, trying to convince herself that her eyes had played tricks on her in the fading light. 15 years was a long time. People changed. That confident cowboy riding down Main Street could be anyone. A stranger passing through, a distant relative she'd forgotten, a figment of her overwrought imagination. But deep in her bones she knew the truth. She'd know Daniel Mackenzie's silhouette anywhere, even if the world ended and began again. The sound of boots on the front porch steps made her freeze, heavy measured footsteps that paused at the door, followed by 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The same pattern Daniel used to tap on her bedroom window when they were teenagers. 2 quick raps, then a pause, then one final knock, their secret signal. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Downstairs she could hear her mother's voice answering the door, followed by a deeper voice that sent shivers down her spine. That voice roughened by years and weather, but still unmistakably his, saying words that made her world tilt sideways. "Good evening, Mrs. Patterson. I'm Daniel Mackenzie. I was wondering if I might have a word with Margaret." Margaret sank onto her bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. He'd used her maiden name, not knowing she'd taken her stepfather's surname when her mother remarried. He'd come here, to her childhood home, expecting to find the girl he'd left behind. "I'm afraid Margaret is quite busy with wedding preparations." Her mother's voice drifted up the stairs, polite but firm. Perhaps you could call again at a more convenient time. Tomorrow won't work for me, ma'am. Daniel's voice carried a quiet intensity that Margaret remembered from when he'd made promises under the stars. I've ridden a long way to see her, and I'm afraid this can't wait. Margaret rose on unsteady legs and crept to the top of the stairs, where she could see down into the front hallway without being seen. Daniel stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, looking nothing like the boy who'd left Cedar Ridge 15 years ago, and everything like the man she dreamed he might become. He was taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from facing down storms and winning. His dark hair was longer now, touching his collar, and his face had been carved into harder lines by sun and wind and responsibility. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes that had haunted her dreams, were exactly the same. Margaret Elizabeth Patterson, he said, and she realized he was looking directly at her through the banister spindles. Would you come down here, please? We need to talk. The use of her full name, the name only he had ever called her, made her knees weak. He'd seen her watching, had known she was there all along. Her mother looked up the stairs with confusion and something that might have been worry. Margaret, dear, do you know this gentleman? Margaret descended the stairs slowly, her hand gripping the banister for support. With each step, 15 years seemed to fall away, until she felt 16 again, sneaking out to meet the boy who'd stolen her heart with wildflower bouquets and whispered promises. Hello, Daniel, she said when she reached the bottom, proud that her voice came out steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. Hello, Margaret Elizabeth. His eyes never left her face, drinking her in like a man dying of thirst who'd finally found water. You look... He swallowed hard. You look beautiful. Margaret's mother cleared her throat pointedly. Perhaps we should have this conversation in the parlor, with proper supervision. But Daniel shook his head. With respect, Mrs. Patterson, what I have to say to your daughter is private. Margaret Elizabeth, would you walk with me? It wasn't really a question, and they both knew it. Margaret had never been able to refuse Daniel Mackenzie anything, and 15 years hadn't changed that fundamental truth about herself. Just for a few minutes, she heard herself saying, reaching for her shawl. I'll be back soon, Mother. They walked in silence through the familiar streets of Cedar Ridge, past the church where Margaret would marry Thomas tomorrow, past the schoolhouse where they'd first kissed behind the big oak tree. The town looked smaller than it had when they were children, worn down by drought and economic hardship, but the stars overhead were exactly the same ones they'd wished on 15 years ago. Daniel finally stopped at the old bridge that crossed Miller's Creek, the same spot where he'd carved their initials into the wooden railing when they were 17. The carving was still there, weathered but visible. DM plus MP forever. Forever, Daniel said quietly, running his thumb over the carved letters. I meant it when I carved that, Margaret Elizabeth. I've meant it every day since. Margaret wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though the evening wasn't cold. Then why did you leave without a word? Why did you let me believe you were dead for 15 years? Daniel turned to face her, and in the moonlight she could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes. Because I was a boy with nothing to offer you except love and dreams. Because your father made it clear that a ranch hand's son would never be good enough for his daughter. Because I knew if I stayed, I'd drag you down with me when my family lost everything. That should have been my choice to make, Margaret said, though the words came out softer than she'd intended. You were 17, Margaret Elizabeth. Your whole life ahead of you, college back east, chances to see the world. I couldn't ask you to throw that away for a boy who couldn't even keep his family's ranch from foreclosure. Margaret stared at him, this man who'd been the boy she'd loved with the fierce, desperate intensity of first love. So you decided for me. You decided what I could and couldn't handle, what I did and didn't want. I was wrong, Daniel said simply. I've regretted leaving you every day since, but I needed to become someone worthy of you first, someone who could give you the life you deserved. And now? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Margaret's heart stopped beating. Now I own a spread in Montana that's bigger than anything in this county. I've got a house with glass windows and a real kitchen, cattle that can survive drought, and money in the bank. Now I'm the man I promised I'd become." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a diamond that caught the moonlight like captured starfire. "Now I can offer you everything you deserve, Margaret Elizabeth. A real life, a real future. Love that never stopped growing, not even when I tried to kill it." Margaret stared at the ring, at this man who'd become everything she'd once dreamed he could be, at the future stretching out before her like an uncharted territory full of possibility and risk. "Daniel," she whispered, and his name on her lips felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. "Marry me," he said, his voice rough with 15 years of longing. "Not tomorrow, not to that sheriff's boy who doesn't know the real you. Marry me tonight, Margaret Elizabeth. Come to Montana and help me build something beautiful." Margaret looked at the ring, then at Daniel's face, then at the town sleeping peacefully around them. The town where tomorrow she was supposed to marry a good man who loved her, a safe man who would never break her heart because he'd never really owned it. "I can't," she said, the words tearing out of her throat like they were lined with razors. "Daniel, I can't. It's too late. The wedding is tomorrow. The guests are coming. My dress is—" "I don't care about the dress," Daniel said fiercely. "I don't care about the guests or the church or what people will say. I care about you, about us, about the love that's been waiting 15 years for its second chance." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and horse and the sage that still clung to his clothes from the trail. Close enough that she could see her reflection in his eyes, could remember what it felt like to be loved completely, desperately, without reservation. "I never stopped loving you, cowboy," she whispered, the words she'd kept locked in her heart for 15 years finally breaking free. And then Daniel Mackenzie was kissing her under the same stars that had blessed their first kiss, and Margaret realized that some things, true things, important things, forever things, were worth any price you had to pay for them. Margaret returned home near midnight with Daniel's kiss still burning on her lips and his ring hidden in her closed fist. The house was dark except for a single lamp burning in the parlor window, her mother's way of saying she'd waited up despite the late hour. "Margaret, dear, there you are." Her mother appeared in the hallway before Margaret could slip upstairs, still fully dressed despite the hour. "I was beginning to worry. That young man seemed quite intense." "He's an old friend, Mother." Nothing more. The lie tasted bitter, especially with Daniel's ring pressed against her palm, like a secret that threatened to burn through her skin. Her mother's sharp eyes missed nothing. "An old friend who travels all the way from wherever he's been to call on you the night before your wedding? Margaret, I may be getting on in years, but I'm not blind. Who is Daniel Mackenzie to you?" Margaret sank into the parlor chair, suddenly exhausted by the weight of secrets and impossible choices. He was someone I cared about once. Before you and Father Patterson married, before we moved to the big house, when we were children. Children don't look at each other the way you two were looking at each other tonight." Her mother sat across from her, her voice gentle but firm. "Margaret, you're getting married tomorrow morning. To a good man who loves you, who can provide for you, who will never break your heart the way—" She paused, studying her daughter's face. "The way this Daniel Mackenzie did before, I'm guessing." Margaret opened her hand and stared at the ring Daniel had offered her. The diamond caught the lamplight, throwing tiny rainbows across her palm. "He asked me to marry him tonight, Mother. To run away with him to Montana." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of experience and hard-earned wisdom. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I couldn't, that it was too late." Margaret's voice broke slightly. "But Mother, what if it isn't? What if love is supposed to feel like your heart might explode from joy and terror all at once? What if I'm about to marry the wrong man? Thomas Whitmore is a good man, Margaret. He's steady, reliable, respectable. He'll never leave you wondering where he is or whether he's coming home. He'll never break your heart and disappear for 15 years. But I don't love him the way I love Daniel." The admission hung in the air between them like a confession. Her mother leaned forward, taking Margaret's hands in hers. Love isn't just passion and racing hearts, dear one. Love is also choosing someone every day, building a life together, weathering storms side by side. That wild, desperate love you feel for Daniel Mackenzie, it's beautiful, but is it enough to build a lifetime on? Margaret thought about Daniel's transformed presence, the quiet confidence he'd gained, the success he'd built with his own hands. He's changed, Mother. He's not the boy who left anymore. He owns land in Montana, he's successful, he can provide for me now. And what about you? Are you still the girl who would have followed him anywhere? Or have you changed too? The question struck Margaret like a physical blow. She looked around the comfortable parlor, at the life her mother had built with steady, reliable Father Patterson after Margaret's birth father had died. A life of security, respectability, community standing. Everything Daniel couldn't offer 15 years ago. Everything Thomas could provide now. But was security worth living without the kind of love that made her feel alive? The sound of horses in the street outside made both women look toward the window. Margaret's heart leaped, wondering if Daniel had come back, but the hoofbeats passed by without stopping. "I need to think," Margaret said finally. I need to be alone for a while." Her mother kissed her forehead with the tenderness of someone who remembered her own impossible choices. "Whatever you decide, I'll stand by you. But decide quickly, dear one. The morning will come whether you're ready or not." Margaret climbed the stairs to her room, where her wedding dress still hung like a beautiful obligation. She sat on her bed and stared at the two paths stretching out before her. The safe road to a respectable marriage with Thomas, or the uncertain trail to Montana with the man who'd owned her heart since she was 16. She was still sitting there when dawn crept through her windows, Daniel's ring clutched in one hand and Thomas's engagement ring heavy on her finger. The sound of carriages arriving in the street below told her the wedding guests were beginning to gather. In 2 hours, she would either walk down the aisle to Thomas Whitmore, or she would be riding out of Cedar Ridge forever with Daniel Mackenzie. A soft knock on her door made her look up. "Come in." Her maid Jenny peeked into the room with a worried expression. "Miss Margaret, your mother sent me to help you dress for the ceremony, but you haven't. That is, should I start the bath water?" Margaret looked at the wedding dress, then at Daniel's ring, then at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked older than her 31 years, worn down by 15 years of living half a life, of loving safely instead of truly. "Jenny," she said slowly, "what would you do if the love of your life came back and asked you to choose between everything you'd built and everything you'd ever wanted?" Jenny, barely 20 and still full of romantic dreams, didn't hesitate. "I'd choose love, miss. Security you can build anywhere with the right person, but love like that only comes once in a lifetime." Margaret smiled, feeling something crystallize in her chest like ice forming on a winter pond. "Then help me out of this nightgown, Jenny, but not into the wedding dress." "Miss, help me dress for traveling, riding clothes, something practical for a long journey." Margaret stood up, feeling lighter than she had in years. "And Jenny, go down to the kitchen and ask cook to pack me some food for the trail. Tell her I'm going home." As Jenny bustled around the room, gathering clothes and toiletries, Margaret sat at her writing desk and composed 2 letters. The first was to Thomas, apologizing for the pain she was about to cause him, explaining that she could not marry him when her heart belonged to another man, wishing him happiness with someone who could love him the way he deserved. The second was shorter, addressed to Daniel Mackenzie at the hotel where he was surely waiting for her answer. "Meet me at our tree in 1 hour. My answer is yes, forever. M.E." She sealed both letters and gave them to Jenny to deliver, then dressed quickly in her writing habit and gathered the few possessions that truly mattered to her: her mother's Bible, the locket Daniel had given her when they were 17, and the dried wildflowers he'd picked for her on their last day together 15 years ago. As she prepared to sneak out of the house, Margaret caught sight of herself in the mirror one last time. The woman looking back at her was radiant with purpose, glowing with the kind of joy that only came from choosing love over fear. She pinned Daniel's ring to the inside of her jacket, over her heart, and whispered a prayer of gratitude for second chances and the courage to take them. Downstairs, she could hear the bustle of wedding preparations continuing, flowers being arranged, final details being confirmed, guests arriving to witness a ceremony that would never happen. But Margaret felt no guilt, only a wild, singing freedom that made her want to laugh out loud. She slipped out the back door and made her way through the early morning streets of Cedar Ridge, toward the old oak tree where Daniel was waiting, where her real life was about to begin. Behind her, the church bells began to ring, calling the faithful to witness a wedding. Ahead of her, the sun was rising over the mountains of Montana, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise. Margaret Elizabeth Patterson had finally chosen love over duty, adventure over security, and her heart over everyone else's expectations. And she had never felt more certain of anything in her life. Daniel was waiting beneath the old oak tree exactly where Margaret had known he would be, his horse saddled and a second mount ready beside it. He'd changed from his formal clothes into working gear, leather chaps, a worn duster coat, and the kind of practical hat that could shield a man's face from sun and rain across 1,000 miles of open country. When he saw her approaching through the morning mist, his face transformed with relief and something deeper, a joy so profound it made Margaret's chest tight with emotion. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, stepping forward to meet her, halfway between the tree and the road. "I've been running from you for 15 years, Margaret replied, breathless from her hurried walk and the magnitude of what she was doing. "I'm tired of running." Daniel's smile could have powered the town's new electric lights. He reached for her hands, dirt-stained and practical now instead of soft from a life of leisure, and brought them to his lips. "Margaret Elizabeth, are you sure? Once we ride out of here, there's no taking it back. No returning to your safe life with Thomas Whitmore." Margaret looked back toward town, where she could see the steeple of the church where she should have been walking down the aisle in 30 minutes. Instead of regret, she felt only a wild, singing freedom that made her want to laugh out loud. "The only thing I've ever been sure of is loving you," she said. "Everything else was just waiting." Daniel helped her mount the mare he'd brought for her, a gentle sorrel with intelligent eyes and a comfortable gait. As Margaret settled into the saddle, muscle memory from her childhood riding lessons came flooding back. She'd always been a natural horsewoman, though her mother had insisted proper ladies rode side saddle with dignity rather than astride with practicality. Today, dignity could go to hell. Today was about freedom. They'd ridden perhaps 2 miles out of town, following the old cattle trail toward the mountain pass, when they heard it, the sound that chilled both their hearts. Church bells ringing frantically in the pattern that meant emergency, discovery, alarm. "They know," Margaret said, reining in her horse to listen. Daniel's jaw tightened as he scanned the road behind them. "How long before they organize a search party?" "Thomas is methodical. He'll check everywhere in town first, question everyone who might have seen me. But his father?" Margaret's blood ran cold as she thought of Sheriff Whitmore, a man who took personal offense at anything that disrupted his vision of how the world should work. "His father will assume I've been kidnapped or coerced. He'll come after us hard and fast." "Can you ride harder than this, Margaret Elizabeth?" "The trail gets rough once we hit the mountains." Margaret had spent most of the last 15 years in parlors and kitchens, attending tea parties and charity functions. But she'd grown up on horseback, racing Daniel across these same hills when they were teenagers, with nothing but time and dreams ahead of them. "Try me, Cowboy," she said, and spurred her horse into a gallop. They rode like the devil himself was chasing them, following game trails and creek beds that would be harder to track than the main roads. Daniel led with the confidence of a man who'd spent years learning to navigate by stars and landmarks, while Margaret rediscovered the joy of speed and wind and the feeling that anything was possible as long as you were willing to risk everything for it. Behind them, the church bells had stopped ringing, replaced by something worse. The distant sound of hoofbeats and shouting voices, a lot of hoofbeats. "How many men would Sheriff Whitmore bring?" Daniel called over the thunder of their horses' hooves. "All of them," Margaret replied grimly, "plus half the ranchers in the county. They'll see this as an insult to the town's honor, not just a broken engagement." Daniel cursed under his breath and veered their path toward a narrow canyon that cut between 2 ridges. "Can you handle rough terrain?" Margaret's answer was to urge her horse faster up the rocky slope. Her riding skirt hiked up scandalously high, and her hair streaming behind her like a banner of rebellion. They climbed steadily for an hour, the sound of pursuit growing fainter but never disappearing entirely. The trail became treacherous, winding between boulders and across loose shale that could send a horse tumbling with one wrong step. But Margaret's mount was sure-footed and responsive, and she found herself settling into the rhythm of serious riding with an ease that surprised her. "There's a way station about 5 miles ahead," Daniel called back to her as they crested a ridge. "We can rest the horses and decide whether to keep running or make a stand." "Make a stand?" Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. "Daniel, they have guns. Sheriff Whitmore won't hesitate to use them if he thinks you've kidnapped me." "Have I kidnapped you, Margaret Elizabeth?" The question made her laugh despite their desperate situation. "No, Cowboy. You've rescued me." The way station turned out to be an abandoned line shack, probably built for railroad surveyors years ago and left to weather into silvered boards and broken windows. But it had a corral for the horses and a roof that didn't leak, which made it a palace compared to sleeping under the stars. Daniel swung down from his saddle and helped Margaret dismount, his hands spanning her waist with casual intimacy that sent heat shooting through her entire body. For a moment they stood close together, breathing hard from the ride, and Margaret was acutely aware of everything about him. The way his shirt clung to his chest with sweat, the sun lines around his eyes, the careful way he was watching her, as if she might disappear like smoke. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Margaret reached up and traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips, marveling at the reality of being able to touch him freely after 15 years of careful distance. "Only that it took us 15 years to get back to each other," she said. Daniel captured her hand and pressed it flat against his chest, where she could feel his heart hammering as fast as her own. "I won't let them take you back, Margaret Elizabeth. Whatever happens when they catch up to us, I won't let them force you into a life you don't want." "They won't catch us," Margaret said with a conviction that surprised her. "We know these mountains better than they do, and we have something they don't." "What's that?" "We have everything to lose and everything to gain. That makes people dangerous." The sound of approaching horses cut their conversation short. Daniel grabbed his rifle from his saddle while Margaret peered through the broken window toward the trail below. 8 riders, she reported. Sheriff Whitmore in the lead, Thomas beside him, and 6 deputized ranchers. Daniel checked his ammunition with practiced efficiency. "Are you prepared to fight for this, Margaret Elizabeth?" "Really fight?" Margaret thought about the wedding dress hanging in her bedroom, about the life of quiet desperation she'd almost condemned herself to, about 15 years of loving a memory instead of living a reality. "I've been fighting for this my whole life," she said. "I just didn't know it until now." The riders had spotted their trail and were climbing toward the way station, moving carefully but with obvious determination. Margaret could see Thomas's face even at a distance, confused, hurt, angry, but not yet truly dangerous. Sheriff Whitmore, on the other hand, rode with the grim purpose of a man who intended to restore order to his world no matter what it cost. "Margaret Patterson," Sheriff Whitmore's voice echoed off the canyon walls as the posse drew within shouting distance. "Come out where we can see you. If you've been harmed, we'll see that justice is done." Daniel positioned himself at the window with clear sight lines down the trail. "Answer him," he said quietly. "Let them know you're here by choice." Margaret stepped into the doorway where the entire posse could see her clearly. She was disheveled from hard riding, her hair coming loose from its pins, and her riding skirt stained with dust and horse sweat. She looked nothing like the proper banker's daughter who'd been expected to walk down the aisle an hour ago. She looked gloriously, defiantly alive. "I'm fine, Sheriff Whitmore," she called back. "I'm exactly where I choose to be." "That man has clearly coerced you." Thomas's voice cracked with emotion. "Margaret, whatever he's threatened you with, we can protect you. Come home and we'll forget this ever happened." Margaret felt a stab of genuine pity for Thomas, a good man who deserved to marry someone who could love him with her whole heart instead of just the parts that weren't already given away. "I'm sorry, Thomas," she called back. "I'm sorry for hurting you, but I can't marry you." "I never could. My heart belongs to someone else." "Then you're coming back with us anyway." Sheriff Whitmore shouted. A woman in your condition isn't capable of making rational decisions. Mackenzie, release her now and we'll consider not hanging you for kidnapping. Daniel stepped into view beside Margaret, his rifle held casually but ready. The lady made her choice, Sheriff. I suggest you respect it. The only choice she's made is to ruin herself with a drifter and a fortune hunter. Sheriff Whitmore's horse danced sideways, sensing its rider's agitation. Stand down, Mackenzie, or we'll take her back by force. Margaret felt Daniel tense beside her, felt the moment balance on a knife's edge between talking and shooting. She thought about her mother's words about love being a daily choice, about building something lasting instead of just chasing passion. Then she thought about 15 years of waiting for her real life to begin. Sheriff, she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. If you take me back to Cedar Ridge, I'll run away again. If you force me to marry Thomas, I'll be gone before the honeymoon ends. If you lock me up to keep me safe, I'll find a way out. I am not a child or a possession to be managed. I am a woman making a choice about my own life. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind through the canyon and the nervous snorting of horses. Then Sheriff Whitmore raised his rifle. That's enough talking, he said. Time slowed to the rhythm of Margaret's heartbeat as Sheriff Whitmore's rifle caught the morning sunlight. She could see the calculation in his weathered face, the way his finger curved around the trigger with the casual familiarity of a man who'd ended disputes with violence before. Sheriff, no! Thomas spurred his horse forward, his face pale with horror. She's not hurt. She's just confused. There's no need for shooting. But Sheriff Whitmore's eyes never left Daniel's face. Boy's armed, and he's taken a woman against her will. That's kidnapping in my book, and kidnapping's a hanging offense. I wasn't taken against my will, Margaret said, stepping protectively in front of Daniel, despite his quiet protest. I left of my own choice. Sheriff Whitmore, you've known me since I was a child. Do I look like someone who's been forced into anything? She spread her arms wide, letting him see her clearly. Disheveled but unharmed, eyes bright with defiance rather than fear, chin lifted with the same stubborn pride that had gotten her into trouble in Sunday school 20 years ago. You look like a woman who's lost her mind over a pretty face and smooth words, Sheriff Whitmore replied coldly, which is exactly why the law don't let women make decisions about criminal matters. The casual dismissal of her autonomy hit Margaret like a slap. Behind her, she felt Daniel's fury radiating like heat from a forge. But when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Sheriff, I've got papers proving I own 3,000 acres of prime grazing land in Montana Territory. I've got bank statements showing I can support a wife in comfort. I've got references from the territorial marshal vouching for my character. What exactly makes me unfit to marry the woman I love? The fact that you stole her from another man's wedding, Sheriff Whitmore snapped. The fact that you've got her out here in the wilderness, acting like a common... Careful, Daniel interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Think real careful about what you say next about the woman I'm going to marry. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Margaret could see the other men in the posse, shifting nervously in their saddles, hands drifting toward their weapons. These were ranchers and shopkeepers, not gunfighters. They'd come along to help search for a missing woman, not to start a shooting war in the mountains. This is insane, Thomas said suddenly, his voice cracking with strain. All of this is insane. Margaret, if you truly don't want to marry me, just come back to town and we'll call off the wedding properly. There's no need for running away like outlaws. Margaret looked at Thomas, kind, steady Thomas, who'd never asked for anything more than a quiet life with a respectable wife. He deserved so much better than being left at the altar by a woman whose heart had never really belonged to him. Thomas, she said gently, if I come back to town, your father will have me declared mentally incompetent and committed to an asylum. We both know it. He's already decided I'm not capable of making my own choices. That's ridiculous, Thomas protested, but his voice lacked conviction. They all knew Sheriff Whitmore's reputation for handling problems in whatever way kept the peace and preserved his vision of proper order. Is it? Margaret pulled Daniel's ring from inside her jacket and held it up where everyone could see it. This man has offered me marriage, Thomas. A real proposal, with a ring and a future, and everything proper. The only difference between his offer and yours is that I love him. The simple truth hung in the air, like smoke from a campfire. Several of the posse members exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the simple kidnapping case they'd signed up for. Love, Sheriff Whitmore spat. You've known this drifter for what, a day? 2 days? And you're ready to throw away everything your family's built for you? I've known Daniel Mackenzie since I was 16 years old, Margaret replied steadily. We grew up together. We planned to marry before circumstances separated us. Sheriff, he's not some stranger who wandered into town. He's the boy who used to help my father with the horses when the bank foreclosed on his family's ranch. A murmur ran through the posse as several men recognized the name. The Mackenzie Ranch had been a respected operation before the drought hit. Old Tom Mackenzie had been a fair man who'd helped his neighbors through hard times until he couldn't help himself. The Mackenzie boy, Deputy Harrison's voice carried surprise and something that might have been respect. Thought he died years ago. Might as well have, Sheriff Whitmore said harshly. Family lost everything, boy disappeared, and now he shows up 15 years later claiming to be some big success? More likely he spent the time robbing trains or rustling cattle. Actually, Daniel said, reaching slowly into his saddlebag, I spent it building the largest horse breeding operation in Montana Territory. He pulled out a leather portfolio and tossed it down where it landed at Sheriff Whitmore's horse's feet. Bank statements, property deeds, letters of reference from territorial officials. Everything you need to verify that I'm exactly who I say I am. Margaret watched Sheriff Whitmore's face as he dismounted and examined the papers. She could see his confident certainty wavering as he read through documentation that clearly established Daniel as a man of substance and reputation. Don't matter what papers he's got, Sheriff Whitmore said finally, but his voice had lost some of its authority. He still stole another man's bride. He didn't steal anything, Margaret said fiercely. Thomas, tell him I never belonged to you, that we were never really engaged by choice. Thomas's face went white. Margaret, what are you saying? I'm saying our fathers arranged our marriage when we were children. I'm saying you never actually asked me to marry you. You just assumed I would because it's what everyone expected. I'm saying I never said yes because nobody ever asked me what I wanted. The truth hit the assembled men like a physical blow. Arranged marriages weren't uncommon on the frontier, but they were supposed to at least have the appearance of mutual consent. That's not... I thought you wanted... Thomas struggled with words, his face cycling through confusion, hurt, and dawning understanding. Margaret, you never said you didn't want to marry me. When did I ever have the chance? Margaret's voice was gentle but implacable. When was I ever asked what I wanted instead of being told what was best for me? One of the ranchers, old Pete Jameson, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sheriff, maybe we ought to hear the lady out. If she's saying she wasn't willing, she's saying she's been bewitched by a smooth-talking fortune hunter, Sheriff Whitmore snapped. And I'm saying we're taking her back to town where she belongs. No, the word came out of Margaret with quiet finality. I won't go back. If you try to force me, I'll fight you every step of the way. If you succeed in dragging me back, I'll run away again at the first opportunity. If you lock me up, I'll find a way out. Sheriff Whitmore, I am not a piece of property to be returned to its proper place. I am a grown woman making a choice about my own life. She moved to stand beside Daniel, her hand finding his with natural ease. I choose Daniel Mackenzie. I choose a life where I'm valued for who I am instead of what I represent. I choose love over duty and happiness over security. And if you're wrong, Sheriff Whitmore's voice was hard with disapproval. If this man breaks your heart and leaves you stranded somewhere with nothing? Margaret looked up at Daniel, seeing 15 years of longing and determination written in the lines of his face. Then at least I'll have lived my own life instead of the one other people picked out for me. The silence stretched long enough for a hawk to circle overhead and disappear beyond the canyon rim. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice heavy with resignation and something that might have been relief. Let her go, Pa. Sheriff Whitmore whirled in his saddle. What did you say? I said let her go. Thomas straightened in his saddle, looking older than his 29 years. She doesn't want to marry me? She never did. I was just too proud to admit I could see it. Son, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years. Thomas looked directly at Margaret, his eyes sad but no longer desperate. I deserve a wife who loves me the way you love him, and you deserve to be happy, even if it's not with me. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. Thomas, I'm so sorry. You're a good man, and you deserve so much better than what I could have given you. Yeah, well, Thomas managed a rueful smile. Maybe this is better for both of us in the long run. Sheriff Whitmore looked around at his posse, reading the shift in mood with the instincts of a man who'd spent his life gauging which way the wind was blowing. The other men were nodding agreement with Thomas, looking relieved to avoid a confrontation that had never felt right in the first place. This is a mistake, he said finally, holstering his rifle with obvious reluctance. Mark my words, this will end badly for everyone involved. Maybe, Daniel said, his arm circling Margaret's waist. But it'll be our mistake to make. Sheriff Whitmore remounted his horse and gathered his reins with sharp, angry movements. You're not welcome in Cedar Ridge anymore, Mackenzie. Either of you. If I see you in my town again, I'll arrest you for disturbing the peace. We won't be back, Margaret said quietly. There's nothing for us here anymore. As the posse turned to ride back down the mountain, Thomas lingered for a moment. Margaret, be happy. That's all I ever really wanted for you. Then he was gone, following his father and the other men back toward a town where wedding guests were probably still waiting for a ceremony that would never happen. Margaret and Daniel stood together in the sudden quiet, watching the dust settle in the distance. No regrets? Daniel asked, echoing his question from the night before. Margaret turned in his arms, seeing their future spread out before them like an unexplored map full of possibilities. Only that it took us 15 years to get here. Then Daniel Mackenzie was kissing her under the wide Montana sky, and Margaret knew she was finally, truly home. The Montana territory stretched before them like a promise written in endless sky and rolling grassland. Margaret had never seen country so vast, so untamed, so full of possibility. After 5 days of hard riding north from Cedar Ridge, following trails that Daniel knew like the lines on his own hands, they'd finally crested the ridge that looked down into the valley he called home. There, Daniel said, reining in his horse beside a weathered marker stone. The Mackenzie Ranch. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The spread below them was everything Daniel had promised, and more. Thousands of acres of prime grazing land dotted with cattle and horses, a substantial ranch house built of local stone and timber, outbuildings that spoke of prosperity and careful planning. Smoke rose from the chimney in a welcoming curl, and she could see figures moving around the yard with the purposeful bustle of a working operation. Daniel, it's beautiful, she whispered. It's more than I ever imagined. Daniel's face glowed with pride and something deeper, the satisfaction of a man who'd built something lasting with his own hands. Took me 12 years to get it this way. Started with nothing but a half-dead horse and determination to prove I could be worthy of you. You were always worthy of me, Margaret said, reaching across the space between their horses to take his hand. I just wish it hadn't taken us so long to find our way back to each other. They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. As they approached the ranch house, Margaret could see the details that marked this as a home rather than just a property. Flower boxes under the windows, a porch swing built for two, a kitchen garden laid out with the kind of care that spoke of someone planning to stay. Mr. Mackenzie, a weather-beaten man, emerged from the barn, his face splitting into a wide grin. Didn't expect you back for another week. How'd things go in Wyoming? Better than expected, Joe, Daniel replied, dismounting and helping Margaret down from her horse with careful courtesy. I'd like you to meet my wife, Margaret Mackenzie. Margaret's heart skipped at hearing her new name spoken aloud for the first time. They'd been married by a circuit preacher in a small town 2 days out from Cedar Ridge, standing under the stars with only their horses as witnesses. It had been the most beautiful wedding ceremony she could have imagined. Simple, heartfelt, and gloriously free from the expectations of others. Joe's weathered face lit up with delight. Well, I'll be damned, Begging your pardon, ma'am. The boss finally went and got himself hitched. Wait till the boys hear about this. We've been telling him for years he needed a good woman to civilize this place. The place looks pretty civilized already, Margaret said, looking around at the well-maintained buildings and carefully tended grounds. That's all Mr. Mackenzie's doing, ma'am. Man's got more energy than a dozen regular folks, always building something, improving something, planning the next expansion. Joe gestured toward the house. Come on up to the porch and I'll get Martha to fix you something to eat. She's our cook, and she's been fussing about this place needing a woman's touch for months. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of introductions and welcomes. The Mackenzie Ranch employed 12 full-time hands plus seasonal workers, and every one of them seemed genuinely delighted by Daniel's unexpected marriage. Margaret found herself swept into their easy camaraderie, treated not as an outsider to be viewed with suspicion, but as the missing piece of a puzzle they'd all been waiting to see completed. Martha, the cook, was a motherly woman in her 50s who took one look at Margaret's travel-stained riding clothes and immediately began planning a complete wardrobe overhaul. Lord have mercy, child. You can't go around dressed like a cowhand when you're the boss lady, she fussed, leading Margaret upstairs to the master bedroom. We'll send to town for proper fabrics, and I'll have you some decent dresses made up in no time. The master bedroom took Margaret's breath away. It was larger than the entire parlor back home, with windows that looked out over the valley in 3 directions. The furniture was handmade but beautifully crafted, and everything spoke of comfort without ostentation. Daniel built most of this himself, Martha said proudly. Worked on this room for months, saying it had to be perfect for when the right woman came along. Of course, we all figured he was just daydreaming, but looks like he knew what he was about after all. That evening, after the hands had returned to their bunkhouse and the ranch had settled into peaceful quiet, Margaret found herself alone with Daniel on the porch swing she'd noticed from the ridge. The stars overhead were brighter than any she'd ever seen, unmarred by the smoke and lamplight of town. No regrets? Daniel asked, settling his arm around her shoulders with the easy intimacy of a man who finally had the right to hold the woman he loved. About leaving Cedar Ridge? None. Margaret nestled closer to his warmth, breathing in the scent of sage and horse, and the particular smell that was uniquely Daniel. About marrying you? Only that we waited so long. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find this is all a dream, Daniel admitted. 15 years I imagined bringing you here, showing you what I'd built, proving I could provide for you properly. Now you're actually here, and it doesn't feel real. Margaret turned in his arms to look at him directly. It's real, Cowboy. We're real. This life we're building together is real. To prove her point, she kissed him with all the passion of a woman who was finally free to love without reservation. Daniel responded with fervor that spoke of 15 years of denied longing, and for several minutes they lost themselves in the simple miracle of being together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. Margaret Elizabeth Mackenzie, he said, testing the sound of her new name. I like how that sounds. So do I, Margaret replied. Now tell me about our neighbors. What should I expect when we start making social calls? Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. The territory's still pretty sparsely settled, but the folks we do have are good people for the most part. There's the Brewsters about 10 miles south. They run cattle and have 3 daughters who'll be thrilled to have another woman in the area. The Hendersons to the east breed horses like we do, and Sarah Henderson's been dying to have someone to trade recipes with. And the town? Bozeman's about a day's ride east. It's growing fast with the railroad coming through. Has a church, a school, even a lending library that Mrs. Patterson, she's the preacher's wife, organized last year. Daniel paused. It's not like Cedar Ridge, Margaret Elizabeth. People out here care more about what you can do than who your family was back east. You'll be judged on your own merits. Margaret smiled at the prospect. That sounds refreshing. I'm tired of being known as the banker's stepdaughter, or the woman who was supposed to marry Thomas Whitmore. I'd like to be just Margaret Mackenzie for a while. You'll be more than that, Daniel said confidently. Give it 6 months and you'll be the woman who organized the church social, or the one who started the ladies' auxiliary, or the one who helped deliver the Henderson baby when the doctor couldn't make it through the snow. How do you know I'll do any of those things? Because I know you, Daniel replied simply. You've never been able to see a problem without trying to fix it, or meet someone in need without offering help. It's one of the things I love most about you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses shifting in the corral, the soft hoot of an owl somewhere in the cottonwoods by the creek. Daniel, Margaret said eventually, what do you think happened back in Cedar Ridge after we left? Daniel was quiet for a moment. I imagine Sheriff Whitmore had some explaining to do about why he came back without the kidnapped bride. Thomas probably took some ribbing from folks who figured out he'd been jilted. Your mother. He paused. Your mother's probably worried sick, but also secretly relieved that you finally found the courage to choose your own path. Margaret felt a pang of guilt about the pain she'd undoubtedly caused. I should write to her. Let her know I'm safe and happy. We'll send a letter with the next mail rider, Daniel agreed. She deserves to know you're well cared for. What about you? Any regrets about burning bridges with Cedar Ridge? Daniel considered this seriously. I'd have preferred to leave on better terms. But Sheriff Whitmore was never going to approve of me no matter what I did or how much I proved myself. Some men can't stand to admit they were wrong, even when the evidence is staring them in the face. And Thomas? Thomas is a good man who deserves to find happiness with someone who can love him properly. Maybe this will turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to him, even if it doesn't feel that way right now. Margaret hoped that was true. She genuinely wanted Thomas to find the kind of love she'd found with Daniel, the kind that made you feel alive and grateful and brave enough to risk everything for happiness. Tell me about our plans, she said, settling more comfortably against Daniel's chest. What are we going to build here together? Daniel's voice warmed with enthusiasm as he described his vision for expanding the horse breeding operation, his plans to build a bigger house when their family grew, his hopes for eventually opening a school for the scattered ranch children in the area. And what about you? He asked. What do you want to build here, Margaret Elizabeth? Margaret looked out over the valley that was now her home, thinking about the possibilities that stretched before them like an unmarked map. I want to build a life where love comes first, she said, where children grow up knowing they're valued for who they are, not what others expect them to become, where neighbors help neighbors and women have voices in their own destinies. That sounds like a worthy goal, Daniel said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. It sounds like home, Margaret replied. And as they sat together under the vast Montana sky, planning their future and marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment, Margaret knew that some things were worth waiting 15 years for. Some things were worth any risk, any sacrifice, any leap of faith. Love, real love, was worth everything. Margaret Mackenzie stood at the kitchen window of her ranch house, watching her husband work with a particularly stubborn colt in the breaking pen. The late afternoon sun caught the gold highlights in Daniel's hair, and she could see the patient concentration on his face as he moved slowly, earning the young horse's trust rather than demanding its submission. So much had changed since that desperate wedding morning when she'd chosen love over duty. The woman who'd fled Cedar Ridge in riding clothes with nothing but determination and a hidden ring had become someone she barely recognized. Stronger, more confident, utterly at peace with the life she'd built alongside the man she'd never stopped loving. The kitchen around her bore witness to that transformation. Where once she'd struggled to boil water without burning it, she now managed meals for a household of 15 during busy seasons. Her hands, once soft from a life of leisure, were now capable and calloused from real work. She could birth a foal, set a broken bone, organize a barn raising, and still have energy left to dance at the community socials that had become the highlight of everyone's month. Mrs. Mackenzie? Martha appeared in the doorway, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. That letter you've been waiting for just came in with the mail rider. Margaret's heart jumped. She'd been expecting word from Cedar Ridge for months, ever since she'd sent her own carefully crafted letter home. Taking the envelope with slightly trembling hands, she recognized her mother's careful script immediately. Thank you, Martha. I'll read it in the parlor. The parlor had become Margaret's private sanctuary, filled with books Daniel had ordered from back east, and furnished with pieces they'd chosen together during their trips to Bozeman. She settled into her favorite chair by the window and carefully opened the letter that had traveled so far to reach her. My dearest Margaret, I cannot begin to tell you the relief I felt upon receiving your letter and learning that you are safe, well, and genuinely happy. When you disappeared on your wedding morning, my heart broke. Not because you defied expectations, but because I feared I'd failed to give you the courage to choose your own path sooner. You asked about the aftermath of your departure, and I confess it was quite dramatic for several weeks. Sheriff Whitmore ranted about kidnapping and corruption until even his staunchest supporters grew tired of hearing it. Thomas, however, surprised everyone with his dignity. He announced publicly that the wedding had been canceled by mutual agreement and that he wished you every happiness in your new life. I'm pleased to report that Thomas has found his own happiness. Last month, he married Sarah Jenkins, the school teacher who arrived from Boston 6 months after you left. They are clearly devoted to each other, and I believe your decision freed him to find the kind of love he deserved all along. As for the town's opinion of your choice, it has evolved considerably. When word spread that Daniel Mackenzie had become a respected rancher in Montana Territory, and that you had married him in a proper ceremony, most folks came to see your story as romantic rather than scandalous. The tale of childhood sweethearts reunited has become quite popular at social gatherings, though I suspect the version being told has grown more dramatic with each telling. Your stepfather and I have decided to visit you this spring, if you'll have us. I'm eager to meet the man who inspired such courage in my daughter and to see for myself the life you've built together. Please give Daniel my regards and tell him that any man who could make my daughter glow with happiness the way you do in the photograph you sent has my complete approval. All my love, Mother. P.S. I've enclosed a letter that arrived for you last month. The return address says it's from Thomas, and I thought you should have it. Margaret set down her mother's letter with tears of relief and joy blurring her vision. The weight she'd carried for 2 years, guilt over the pain she'd caused, worry about her family's well-being, fear that she'd made a selfish choice that hurt innocent people, finally lifted from her shoulders. The second letter was shorter, written in Thomas's careful hand. Dear Margaret, I hope this letter finds you well and happy in your new life. I wanted you to know that I harbor no resentment about our canceled wedding. In truth, I've come to realize that your courage in following your heart saved us both from a marriage that would have been comfortable, but never truly fulfilling. I've found love myself now, real love, the kind that makes you understand why poets write sonnets and men fight wars. Sarah is everything I never knew I wanted in a wife, and I thank God daily that she came into my life. I suspect I have you to thank for that as well, in a roundabout way. I hope you'll forgive the presumption, but I've taken the liberty of spreading word of your happiness throughout the territory. There were those who spoke ill of your choice, and I felt it my duty to set the record straight about Daniel Mackenzie's character and your genuine contentment. May you have every happiness, Thomas Whitmore. Margaret wiped away tears and looked out the window to where Daniel was now leading the colt around the pen, the animal following him with trust and apparent affection. The sight made her smile through her emotional overflow. It was so perfectly representative of Daniel's approach to everything, patient and persistent, until he earned what he needed through respect rather than force. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look toward the main road, where she could see a familiar buggy raising dust clouds in the distance. Sarah Henderson was coming for their weekly visit, probably with news from town and eager to hear any gossip Margaret might have gleaned from her letters. Margaret rose and smoothed her dress, a practical blue calico that she'd sewn herself, far different from the elaborate gowns her mother had insisted upon back in Cedar Ridge. She liked this version of herself better, this woman who was valued for her capabilities rather than her compliance. Margaret! Sarah Henderson burst through the front door with characteristic energy, her arms full of packages and her face bright with excitement. You'll never guess what happened in town yesterday. What now? Margaret asked, already smiling. Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious, and her visits had become one of Margaret's greatest pleasures. The territorial governor is coming through next month, and they want to hold a reception at the Bozeman Hotel. But here's the best part. Mrs. Patterson asked specifically if you would help organize it. Apparently word has spread about how beautifully you managed the church social last fall. Margaret felt a warm glow of pride. The church social had been her first major community project, and its success had established her reputation as someone who could bring people together and make things happen. "I'd be honored to help," she said, "though I suspect Martha deserves most of the credit for the social success. That woman can cook for 100 people without breaking a sweat." "Don't be so modest. Everyone knows you're the one who convinced the Henderson boys to provide music, talked Mrs. Brewster into donating those beautiful quilts for the auction, and somehow managed to get even cranky old Pete Jameson to dance with his wife." They settled in the parlor with tea and the ginger cookies Sarah had brought, discussing plans for the governor's reception and catching up on community news. Sarah had become the closest friend Margaret had ever had, a woman who valued her for her mind and her contributions, rather than her social connections. "How are things with you and David?" Margaret asked, noting the particular glow in Sarah's cheeks. Sarah blushed prettily. "Actually, that's part of why I came over. We're expecting our first child in the spring, and I was hoping you might be willing to help when the time comes. Dr. Morrison says it should be straightforward, but I'd feel better having another woman there who's been through it." Margaret's smile faltered slightly. It was the one shadow in her otherwise perfect life. After 2 years of marriage, she and Daniel had not yet been blessed with children. Dr. Morrison assured them there was nothing wrong, that these things simply took time for some couples. But Margaret couldn't help feeling the absence of the children she'd always assumed would come naturally. "Of course I'll be there," she said warmly, pushing aside her own disappointment to focus on her friend's joy. "Have you told David yet?" "Last night, I thought the man was going to faint. Then he started planning to build a bigger house immediately." Sarah laughed. "I had to remind him we have 7 months to prepare." Their conversation was interrupted by Daniel's arrival, dusty from his work with the horses but glowing with satisfaction. "Ladies," he said, removing his hat with mock formality, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just planning to revolutionize territorial society," Margaret replied, rising to greet him with a kiss that still made her heart skip after 2 years of marriage. "In that case, I'll leave you to it," Daniel said, his eyes twinkling. "But first, Margaret Elizabeth, I have something to show you." He led her outside to where the colt he'd been working with stood calmly in the pen, no longer showing any signs of the fear and defiance that had marked his earlier behavior. "Watch this," Daniel said, opening the pen gate and walking slowly toward the young horse. The colt came to him immediately, nuzzling his shoulder with obvious affection. "He's beautiful," Margaret said, admiring the animal's clean lines and intelligent eyes. "He's yours, but," Daniel replied simply, "I've been training him specifically for you." Thought it was time the lady of the house had her own personal mount. Margaret stared at the horse, then at her husband, overwhelmed by the simple thoughtfulness of the gift. It wasn't the monetary value, though she knew Daniel had invested considerable time and expertise in the animal's training. It was the recognition of who she'd become, the acknowledgement that she deserved something beautiful in her own. "Daniel, I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me teach you to train horses properly. You've got natural instincts with animals, and I think you'd enjoy the work." Margaret looked at the colt, then at the ranch spread out around them, then at the man who'd waited 15 years to give her not just his love, but his complete respect and partnership. "I never stopped loving you, Cowboy," she said, echoing the words that had changed everything 2 years ago. "And I never stopped believing we'd find our way back to each other," Daniel replied, pulling her close for a kiss that tasted of forever and felt like coming home. As the sun set over the Montana Territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Margaret Mackenzie stood in her husband's arms and marveled at the life they'd built together. It hadn't been easy. There had been challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt and difficulty. But every struggle had been worth it for this. A love that had survived separation, grown stronger through adversity, and created something beautiful enough to last a lifetime. Some stories, she thought, are worth waiting for. Some loves are worth any risk, and some choices, no matter how terrifying they seem at the time, lead exactly where they're supposed to. And that's how Margaret Patterson became Margaret Mackenzie, how a childhood sweetheart returned to claim his forever love, and how one woman's courage to choose authenticity over approval created one of the most beautiful second-chance love stories the American frontier ever witnessed. Think about what we just experienced together. A woman trapped by social expectations found the strength to risk everything, her security, her reputation, her family's approval, for the chance at genuine happiness with the man she'd never stopped loving. A man spent 15 years transforming himself from a poor ranch hand into a successful landowner, driven by the memory of a girl who'd believed in him when no one else would. And a community learned that sometimes the most scandalous choices turn out to be the most right ones. But this story reaches far beyond romance and frontier adventures. It's about the incredible power of authentic love to survive any obstacle: separation, social pressure, time itself. Margaret and Daniel's connection wasn't just passion or physical attraction. It was a deep recognition of souls that were meant to walk through life together, building something meaningful and lasting. It's also about the courage required to choose your own path instead of the one others have mapped out for you. Margaret could have married Thomas, lived a comfortable but hollow life, and never known what it felt like to be truly seen and valued by someone who loved every part of her authentic self. Instead, she chose uncertainty over safety, adventure over comfort, and real love over convenient arrangement. Daniel's journey reminds us that sometimes we have to leave everything behind to become worthy of our dreams. He could have stayed in Cedar Ridge, accepted his family's circumstances, and lived with regret for the rest of his life. Instead, he spent 15 years building himself into the man he'd always had the potential to become: successful, confident, capable of offering Margaret the life she deserved. Even Thomas Whitmore's arc teaches us something profound about love and letting go. His initial pain and confusion gave way to genuine happiness when he found someone who could love him completely. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the freedom to find their real happiness, even when it means accepting that we're not their person. The Montana Territory setting isn't just beautiful backdrop. It represents the kind of place where people are judged by their character and contributions rather than their family connections or past mistakes. Margaret found her voice as a community leader. Daniel built respect through hard work and integrity, and together they created something that enriched everyone around them. This story unfolded in 1883, but its themes are timeless. How many of us have felt pressured to follow paths that don't align with our hearts? How many have had to choose between security and authenticity, between what others expect and what we truly want? How many have discovered that the greatest love stories often require the greatest courage? Margaret and Daniel's love didn't conquer all through magic or luck. It succeeded because they were both willing to work for it, sacrifice for it, and grow into people worthy of the happiness they dreamed of. Their 15-year separation wasn't wasted time. It was preparation for a love mature enough to last a lifetime. What did you think of Margaret's decision to abandon her wedding and follow her heart? Could you have Daniel's patience to spend 15 years building yourself into someone worthy of your dreams? Have you ever had to choose between the safe path and the authentic one? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing how these frontier tales of courage and authentic love inspire you in your own life choices. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that true love is worth waiting for, and that authenticity is worth any risk, make sure to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope and second chances. Subscribe to Wild West Stories for more incredible tales of love triumphing over circumstance, and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest adventures, proving that the human heart always finds a way to true happiness. Remember, real love doesn't follow society's timeline. It follows the heart's truth. And sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we finally have the courage to write our own story instead of living someone else's expectations. Thanks for joining Margaret and Daniel on their journey from childhood sweethearts to Montana partners, proving that some loves are strong enough to survive anything time throws at them. Like this video if you believe that authentic love is worth any wait, any risk, any leap of faith. And subscribe for more legendary frontier stories that prove the best things in life are worth fighting for. What's your own second chance love story? Share it in the comments and inspire others to believe in the power of love that never gives up.